Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from London. I'm Ollie Barrett and these are the headlines. Russian President Vladimir Putin accuses the Ukrainian authorities of stalling talks, but says Moscow is ready to search for solutions during a call with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is duped into a video call with what he believed was the Ukrainian Prime Minister before becoming suspicious and ending the call. Russian airstrikes are reported in the western Lviv region of Ukraine, but the mayor confirms the building hit was not the airport. US President Joe Biden will speak to his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping later. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has confirmed that Biden will warn China of retaliation if Beijing provides military aid to Russia. Chinese southern tech powerhouse Shenzhen has partially eased lockdown measures after President Xi Jinping stressed the need to minimize the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the nation's economy. And in India, people are celebrating the Festival of Colours, with crowds gathering in huge numbers to celebrate the Harvest Festival that also represents the triumph of good over evil. And we will start with Ukraine, and the US is doubling down on its assertion that Russia is committing war crimes there. After US President Joe Biden called Russian President Vladimir Putin a war criminal, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is now saying similar.
Among other things, the intentional targeting of civilians would constitute a war crime. You heard President Biden speak to this yesterday. You heard what I said a few minutes ago. So we are documenting. We welcome the efforts of various groups, institutions, organizations that focus on this to bring all of the evidence together, to continue to document things, and then for there to be accountability, one way or the other.
These accusations come after attacks which have hit civilians conducted by Russian forces. A bombing of a hospital in Mariupol, an attack on civilians in line to buy bread in Chernihiv, an attack on a boarding school for visually impaired children in Lugansk. These are just a few examples that are being raised. Blinken's comments come as authorities are still trying to pull survivors from a bombed theatre in Mariupol a day earlier. The investigations into Vladimir Putin's actions in Ukraine are already underway. The US and 44 other countries are looking into possible violations to establish a commission of inquiry at the United Nations Human Rights Council. The International Criminal Court is also investigating. War crimes can include things like the taking of hostages, willful killings, torture, inhumane treatment of prisoners of war, forcing children to fight. International law lays down three principles. The first is proportionality. It prohibits armies from responding to an attack with excessive violence. A country cannot, for example, bomb an entire city if one of its soldiers is killed. The second is precaution, requiring parties to minimize the harm done to civilian populations. And the third principle is distinction. That says that parties need to be constantly trying to distinguish between the civilian population and the military. Well, Russia, for its part, has denied that it has targeted civilians in Ukraine.
Это и обвинение в обстреле, ставшего уже нарицательным роддома в Мариуполе, и бомбежки Мариупольского театра, и о том, что Россия не выпускает беженцев, и о том, что Россия бомбила мечеть султана Сулеймана в Мариуполе, и о том, что российские войска из автоматического оружия расстреляли очередь в Чернигове. Все эти фейки неоднократно опровергались. Я, во-первых, хочу сказать своей американской коллеге, когда она сказала...
And later, US President Joe Biden is due to hold talks with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. The US has been warning China not to assist Russia with weapons or backing for its military campaign in Ukraine. And we expect those talks between the Chinese and American leaders to get underway in a little under an hour and a half from now. More on the Ukraine conflict and its effects later in this bulletin. Next to Hong Kong, though, where a new wave of COVID is ripping through the city, there's been a deadly Omicron surge and a rising number of COVID-related deaths. It's feared that Hong Kong could run out of coffins within days. In under 3 months, Hong Kong's recorded nearly 1 million infections and more than 4,600 deaths, the bulk of them in the city's unvaccinated elderly population. Researchers estimate the infection toll is significantly higher than official figures and is probably up to half of its 7.4 million population. COVID victims have had at times to be placed in refrigerated shipping containers. The president of the Funeral Business Association says a remaining 300 coffins will be used up in days. Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam has acknowledged the supply issues and says 2 more shipments of coffins will arrive from the mainland soon. She also says she'll order a review of the city's COVID-19 measures early next week. In February, Lam announced a citywide compulsory mass testing exercise slated for March. Lam is expected to announce early next week whether the controversial universal mass testing scheme will proceed.
Time has come for the government to have a midterm review of all those measures announced on the 22nd of February, ranging from border controls, such as flight bans, to quarantine period for arrivals, to whether we are going to do this compulsory universal test, and the resumption of face-to-face learning in schools, and social distancing measures. So just give me a little bit of time. When the 1 month period comes, that is around the 20th or 21st of March, I will give a comprehensive update on the situation.
France goes to the polls in just 23 days, and Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has just unveiled his manifesto. If re-elected, Macron says he will prioritise tax cuts, reforms to the welfare system, and more public investment. He's been holding his first major political campaign event in unveiling a platform aimed at deepening pro-business reforms started in 2017 and with the ambition of reducing high levels of unemployment. He's acknowledged that he hasn't been able to push through the pension overhaul that he promised back in 2017. One of the things he says he wants to do is make sure the unemployed undertake 15 to 20 hours of work or training per week.
La réforme que je propose est différente de celle de 2017 parce que les conditions macroéconomiques ne sont pas les mêmes, parce que le pays continue à se transformer, notre environnement aussi, parce que je tire aussi les enseignements de ce qui n'avait pas été compris. Et donc, à cet égard, la réforme que je souhaite mener, c'est d'augmenter l'âge légal progressivement, comme on l'a toujours fait d'ailleurs, avec un système de trimestre progressif, mais donc de mener cet âge légal jusqu'à 65 ans.
Rival parties have been struggling to cut through with the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine dominating headlines. In the last 5 weeks, Emmanuel Macron's held 20 hours of talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Macron's popularity, according to the polls, has improved in the run-up to the election. Ross Cullen joins me live from our Paris bureau now. And Ross, what do we think explains that rise in Macron's popularity according to those polling numbers in recent weeks?
Hi, Ollie. Yes, he was unveiling that platform just outside Paris in the northern suburbs of the city. Over the last couple of weeks, you're right, we have seen the polls supporting President Macron with a rise in his support, maybe now even touching gaining 30% of the first round votes in the presidential election. We can tie that mostly to the idea of the so-called rally round the flag in times of serious crisis after the COVID-19 pandemic. Now we have a war in Europe. President Macron has been one of the leading figures within the European Union and the Western alliance in trying to maintain pressure on Russia and support for Ukraine. And despite the fact that he has had all those calls with President Putin, and there's another one coming up today, haven't yet been able to find a peaceful solution. Just maintaining that dialogue has shown that he is willing to try to keep that diplomatic path open. There have been some problematic issues for some of his rivals. Marine Le Pen on the extreme right had to throw away more than 1 million of her printed campaign leaflets because they featured a colour splash of her shaking hands with Vladimir Putin. That is no longer a message that her team want to be able to put forward to the electorate. And we have heard from Eric Zemmour. He's another of Marine Le Pen's actual rivals on the far right. He has previously said in the past that what France needs is a French Putin to sort the country out. Those comments coming back to haunt him, and that campaign leaflet of Marine Le Pen's having to be thrown away because of that photo of her with Vladimir Putin.
And Ross, on that idea of Emmanuel Macron not having done much campaigning up to this point, given that we're just 3 weeks out from the first round of voting and his popularity, as you say, appears to be on the rise, should we expect over the next 2 or 3 weeks to see less of him on the campaign trail and more on that diplomatic trail instead?
Well, Ollie, the deadline to submit your candidacy for the French presidential election, the first round is on the 10th of April, that deadline was the 4th of March, and we got as late as the 2nd of March. And Emmanuel Macron still had not announced that he was going to run for re-election. He left it until the very last minute, coming to a matter of hours before confirming his candidacy. He was spending as much of his time, almost all his time, on phone calls with Volodymyr Zelensky, with Vladimir Putin, with Joe Biden and other Western allies. If he wasn't in Paris, he was in Brussels for summits and meetings. So he was really trying to show that he is trying to deal with this war first and foremost. And then after that, then campaigning. It's going to be a lightning campaign. As we said, the 10th of April is the first round. Everybody gets to take part. And then the top 2 candidates from the first round go through to the second round runoff 2 weeks later towards the end of April. So not much time left. There are going to be some campaign events, but not as many as previously. Also, it's not going to be as boisterous a campaign as previous elections. Understandably, this long lead-in with lots of debates and rancorous, that has all just been overwhelmed by the war in Ukraine and the fact that France is having to join with other major European Union powers like Germany to try to deal with this issue on the eastern borders of the European Union. So there are going to be a few campaign events, far fewer than normal. Emmanuel Macron is going to be doing a bit of campaigning, but his number one priority remains trying to support Western allies in trying to find a peaceful resolution to this war in Ukraine, starting with this afternoon, Paris time, his latest phone call with the Kremlin.
Ross Cullen in Paris, thank you. Next to Australia, where the watchdog there is suing Facebook owner Meta over claims of fraudulent advertising on the site for cryptocurrencies. Australia's Consumer Protection Commission has started a federal court proceeding against the social media platform, accusing it of breaching consumer and securities law through false, misleading or deceptive conduct. It also accuses Meta of failing to curb scam ads, even after being alerted by celebrities who were misinterpreted in them. The Australian Commission chair said, apart from resulting in untold losses to consumers, these ads also damage the reputation of public figures falsely associated with the ads. And the Commission claims that Meta failed to take sufficient steps to stop fake ads featuring public figures, even after some of those people reported to Meta that their names and images were being featured in celebrity endorsement scam ads for cryptocurrency. Now, Meta has vowed to defend itself against the charges. Meta is saying, "We don't want ads seeking to scam people out of money or mislead people on Facebook. They violate our policies and are not good for our community." Well, the company claims it uses technology to detect and block such posts and says it's willing to cooperate with the investigation. The Australian watchdog says it is aware that at least one consumer lost more than $480,000 in one of the scams. It is seeking injunctions, legal action, as well as financial penalties on Meta. And returning to Ukraine as promised, and over 3 million people have fled into the countries around Ukraine, but also beyond, since the Russian invasion began last month. Europe has opened its doors, and Ukrainians are finding a warm welcome in many places. Our next story is from Spain, where a convoy of volunteer taxi drivers has stepped up to help the refugee centres in Poland.
As the war in Ukraine enters its fourth week, residents are getting used to waking up to scenes of destruction. This building in Kyiv was damaged by what authorities said was debris from a missile shot down in the early hours of the morning.
We were all expecting that, but it was in the middle of the night, so I wasn't sure that it will happen.
Emergency services workers searched through the rubble looking for survivors. Not everyone managed to escape unharmed. Emergency services said at least one person was killed and 3 wounded after the 16-story building was hit. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the German Bundestag by video link, pulling no punches in a speech that invoked the Holocaust and the Berlin Wall and seemed intended to shame pro-Russian politicians in Moscow's main energy buyer.
After 80 years, this is happening again. And I implore you, every year, politicians repeat the words, "never again." And now we see that these words are worth nothing. A people in Europe is being destroyed. They are trying to destroy everything we hold dear.
In the besieged city of Mariupol, local officials said a theatre where several women and children were sheltering had been bombed by Russian forces on Wednesday. This satellite image shows the theatre before the attack. The word children can be seen written in Russian outside. Mayoral advisor Petro Adroshenko told Reuters by phone that the bomb shelter had held and that there were survivors. Russia denied striking the theatre. As bombardments continue, Western countries said on Thursday that Russian forces were no longer making gains on the ground. British military intelligence said Russian forces were suffering heavy losses from a staunch and well-coordinated Ukrainian resistance. Moscow said on Thursday peace talks with Ukraine were continuing via video link. Although both sides have pointed to limited progress in peace talks this week, President Vladimir Putin showed little sign of relenting. In a televised speech, he condemned traitors and scum at home who helped the West and said the Russian people would spit them out like gnats. Moscow says it is carrying out a special operation to disarm and denazify Ukraine. Kyiv and its Western allies believe Russia launched the unprovoked war to subjugate a neighbour Putin calls an artificial state.
The port city of Odessa in Ukraine, known as the Pearl of the Black Sea, is under the grip of a Russian assault. The residents of Odessa are fortifying their precious city.
We are building barricades, welding anti-tank obstacles, also known as Czech hedgehogs, fortifying the city, making plans to defend the city. The city has turned into a fortress, an unassailable fortress.
To be honest, it's very scary. We've seen it in Mykolaiv already, but here it's on grand scale. In the center of Odessa, near the theater, it's very difficult.
Firefighters of Ukraine are on the front lines of the war. In more than one way, they're on call 24/7. The first responders as Russian forces bomb their cities non-stop. Well, WION correspondent Anas Malik's been speaking to the spokesperson of the State Emergency Service about the situation on the ground.
Four weeks into Russia's invasion, Kyiv, the capital city of Ukraine, has found itself surrounded by enemy forces. And as days go by, the city finds itself the victim of increased Russian shelling. Civilian deaths are increasing as residential buildings are targeted. Svetlana Vodolaga, the spokesperson of State Emergency Services, tells WION that firefighters have to battle human grief along with unstable houses damaged by shelling.
Ситуація дійсно складна. Чому? Тому що вже
The situation is really difficult because for several days in a row our rescuers are facing human grief with the death of civilians. They also have to on daily basis put out the fire carefully and dismantle the houses that were damaged by Russians due to Russian shelling.
The fire department is not alone. Residents of Kyiv who have not left the city offer to volunteer in rescue efforts. Their names are recorded and they are pressed into action when needed. While rescuers are on duty for days, their morale still remains high.
Наші рятувальники чергують доба через 3.
Rescuers are on duty for days. I will say that in physical terms, any person can be tired, but the morale of the rescuers is very high. They are courageous and ready to fight till the end to help the people.
With constant shelling, rescue operations can get tough. Firefighters do not get bulletproof vests, and they need to coordinate the territorial defense units to ensure their safety. Since the invasion began, at least 7 firefighters and rescuers have been killed.
У перший день війни у нас загинув начальник частини, яка знаходилася на території Гостомеля.
On the first day of the war, the chief of the unit located on the territory of Gostomel was shot. Then 2 people from the department were deliberately shot. More than 4 of our rescuers have lost their lives when they went home and came under fire.
Вони рушили домой і просто під час цього потрапляли під обстріл.
The Kyiv City Fire Department has been at the front line of dealing with all sorts of emergencies, and they say they would continue to serve the citizens and the residents of the city of Kiev till the best of their abilities and capabilities. Anas Malik in Kyiv, Ukraine, for WION, World is One.
That has been WION Live Broadcast from London with me, Ollie Barrett. Thanks as ever for watching. Do stay tuned to WION and I'll be back with you next week.
There are many other